Jay, you played against Len Bias on many occasions in your career. When you think back to the type of player he was and what he brought to the floor, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Virtuoso. He was Superman in a basketball uniform. He was an extraordinary athlete that, as a two-footed leaper, was without peer. There were very few players that could do what he could do athletically, getting off the floor off 2 feet especially. And he was a magnificent shooter. Not just a good shooter, he was a magnificent shooter. His form was beautiful, and his accuracy was impeccable. And just it's not often, Rece, that you see jump shooters that are that athletic, that can rise to that height and still shoot the ball with that sort of touch and accuracy. He was an extraordinary player. And I believe, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I believe he was headed toward Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame status, that he would have been, had he played in the NBA, a perennial all-star and would have been a challenger. I'm not saying he would have been as good as Jordan, but he would have been a challenger.
And he would have joined reigning world champions and given the Celtics at the time a much-needed youth infusion, made them much more athletic, give them someone to rival the Pistons, also to ultimately rival Jordan. This is all speculative, but it's part of the legacy. How do you think his addition to the Celtics would have changed that era of basketball in the NBA?
Well, it would have given the Celtics the next superstar to go with an aging group of players that, you know, with Larry Bird and Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, Dennis Johnson, that whole crew, and I think would have injected a superstar power into that team for the next iteration of the Celtics. And they would have been, if Bias would have lived, I believe he would have lived up to his promise and would have been one of the truly great players, not only in the league, but in league history. And I think the Celtics paid a heavy price for his passing, because it was not something they recovered from quickly. It took a long, long time to get over that.
When you think back, you guys had a great team in 1986, really great teams the entire time you were there. You guys had a victory over Maryland, I believe in Cameron Indoor, a night when Bias scored 41 points. What do you remember about that game?
I remember guys coming back to the huddle saying, we can't stop him. And we felt like we would win the game anyway. But there were times when you'd try to foul him and you couldn't even do it, that he would just go through you, over you, around you, whatever it was. And he just had an ability level that was jaw-dropping. And it didn't mean you stop the game and stop competing and trying to win. But when you play against that kind of greatness, I mean, I think it's like being on a golf course with Tiger Woods or something. Or the time you played against Jordan, like, you knew there was a difference between being a great player and being transcendent. And he was in the transcendent category, that you knew they don't make them like this very often. And he was that kind of player. And then, you know, getting to know him a little bit, we wound up playing a fair amount of basketball in barnstorming games after our season was over. And he was just a great guy to be around. Just loved being around him outside of competing against him. And I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of when I learned that he had died. And I think it was the equivalent, Rece, for my generation of the Kennedy assassination. Like, everybody, my parents all remembered, and their friends remembered where they were when they learned that JFK had been assassinated. My generation, I believe, at least for me and my peers, my friends, we all remember exactly where we were when we found out that Len Bias had died. It was a blow that you really can't describe.
Jay, where were you? How did you find out the news?
I was at home in Los Angeles staying with my parents. The draft had just occurred. And actually, my mother told me. She had heard it on television, and she told me, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. And after people forget this, but the next couple of days, that went extraordinarily quickly. The next couple of days, a great football player named Don Rogers passed away of a cocaine overdose and reaction. And from that, I mean, a lot of people talk about, well, you know, so much good came out of Len Bias's passing. I don't see it that way. I think it was such a tragedy that extended beyond sports, beyond Bias, because lawmakers took that to Capitol Hill and passed very, very brutal minimum sentencing guidelines for drug offenses. That there were countless young African-American males that were jailed for extended periods of time for really no reason. And it was as a result of Len Bias's death.
And a bipartisan push as well, as a sort of a testament in some ways to the shock and the hurt that resulted from Bias's passing. Jay Bilas, always great to see you, my friend. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.